So for today, let's learn figures of speech, the figurative language, simile versus metaphor, familiar to all. So what do they intend? What do they signify? What is their purpose? What is exactly figures of speech? They are not at all straightforward language. Why? They are different from straightforward language or literal meaning because they are meant to produce a rhetoric effect. Now, what is rhetoric effect? It means to impress others. Okay, terms like simile, metaphor, usages of sentences this way, it adds to the richness of the language. It impresses others. It produces a beauty of the language aesthetically, emotionally, intellectually. Like, for example, if I have to say to my friend, you should succeed in your life, then I would better prefer saying, you should climb the ladder of success. So the words like climb, ladder, all these produces a very rhetoric effect. It impresses the person. There is a punch and bigger impact than saying you must succeed in your life. Another one example is if my friend is very thin. Okay, so just in a humorous way, I would remark, you look so light as a feather. You're so light as a feather. I would not prefer saying you are so thin. Instead, I would prefer saying you're so light as a feather. So that creates an impression, a bigger impact. There is a richness to the beauty of the language. So these kind of figures of speech, simile, metaphor, and the others, you can find them everywhere in poems and in novels, in songs, in text, in prose. They are everywhere. Simile versus metaphor. Let's learn how are they distinct or how are they similar from each other. Simile is derived from a Latin word similis, which means similar. Similar means resemblance, to resemble something. Whereas metaphor is derived from the Greek word metaphorin, which means to transfer. Something is getting transferred. Okay. Multiple examples would be discussed later, but for better clarity, I hereby take an example. For simile, the example is she is like a rose. The example for metaphor changes to she is a rose. She is a real rose. So you can see the difference here. There is an extra keyword like, which is missing in metaphor. I'll come to that later. So one is an individual, a person, a personality is being compared to rose and a flower. That's an object. Okay. So the comparison should be made between two different entities. One is a person and another is a flower. So look at the second point. Two entities are compared side by side. The person is compared with the flower. In metaphor, the example is she is a real rose. And the second point is metaphor superimposes them. What do you mean by superimpose? To place or to keep a picture or a word on top of something. That's called as superimpose. So when we say she is a real rose, we are placing that individual or the person on top of something else, and that is flower. Okay, so these are the first 2 points. Let's move on to the next. The next point in simile is comparison is direct or explicit. Direct means it's very obvious. Okay, she's like a rose. The comparison is very explicit. Explicit means clear comparison. There is no room for any suspicion or doubt. Whereas in metaphor, comparison is indirect or implicit. Indirect or implicit. Now, what is indirect? Not said in an obvious way. We become doubtful. We become uncertain. Things are not very clear. Implicit means secret and hidden. What the speaker is trying to convey, that's actually a kind of uncertainty. It's abstract, not at all concrete. Okay, so comparison is direct and explicit in simile, and comparison is indirect and implicit in metaphor. Implicit means secret or hidden. The next point is in simile. Something is like something else. In metaphor, something is something else. Okay, as I said, she is like a rose in simile becomes she is a rose in metaphor. A is like B in simile, whereas A is B in metaphor. Okay, one is like the other. There is a comparison between two different entities or objects. And in metaphor, one is the other. A is B. Next differentiation is between keywords. Simile uses keywords like, as, so, than. Okay, the most common keywords used in simile are like, as, so. Than is not so frequently used. One such example is pen is mightier than sword. Now let's see the keywords used in metaphor. Metaphor uses keywords is, are, was, were. Okay, these are the keywords used in metaphor. Is, are, was, were. She is a rose. She was a rose. Okay. Next is, what is the purpose of using these keywords so that we get a clear-cut comparison? Okay, the comparison is made clear in simile while it's the contrary in metaphor. Comparison is not at all concrete. Okay, it's not clear. Things are very foggy and obscure. We get confused. The audience is left to imagine for himself what could be the inference, what could be the moral, what could be the speaker trying to say. So these things happen in metaphor. So for the 8th point, we'll discuss the examples. So let's look at the examples. The first example of simile is, an angry woman is like a troubled fountain. So if I have to say she is very angry and annoyed, then you can use such keywords like a troubled fountain, which means she cannot be pacified or controlled. Next is metaphor. Ministers are the pillars of state. To emphasize how important they are for the structure of the country and the society, they are the pillars of state. So as I mentioned earlier, the keywords in metaphor is, are, was, were. Next is, She is as proud as a peacock. Again, we can see the keywords as and so. You can also say she's so proud as a peacock. The pride of the girl is compared to that of a proud peacock. Next is the rose in all the Greece was Helen of Troy. Helen of Troy was a very beautiful woman in Greece, and so she is compared to the rose. Next is life is like a dream is simile. Life is a dream becomes metaphor. His mind is a magazine. Why it's compared to magazine? A magazine has got the abundance of knowledge. He is a walking encyclopedia. He is a magazine. He is a novel. So these are the examples of simile and metaphor. Stay tuned for more.